One teacher's laugh nearly crushed a kid's pride, until the truth walked in wearing a NASA badge. Have you ever heard a moment fall flat, so hard it sucks the air right out of the room? That's what happened one Thursday morning inside Ms. Worthington's third-grade class at Prescott Elementary in Chandler, Arizona. It was career week. You know, the time when parents parade in with props, stethoscopes, hard hats, laptops, and kids sit cross-legged on a reading rug, proud or embarrassed, depending on what their grown-up does for a living. It broke the rhythm of spelling tests and math drills, and even the shy kids looked forward to it. 8-year-old Jalen Brooks was practically bouncing in his seat. Small for his age but bright-eyed and curious, he talked like every word counted. And today? Every word did. His dad was scheduled to present later that afternoon. So when Mr. Denton, mid-40s, khakis, tucked-in polo, and the kind of smile that didn't always reach his eyes, asked the class to go around and share what their parents did, Jalen sat up like he'd been rehearsing all week. "My dad," he said proudly, "works at NASA." The silence that followed wasn't confusion, it was disbelief. A kid in the back snorted. Someone whispered, "Yeah, right." But it was Mr. Denton's response that landed the deepest cut. He chuckled, not a loud laugh, but that low, dismissive kind, the kind adults use when they think a kid's being silly. "NASA, huh?" he said, raising an eyebrow. "That's quite the imagination, Jalen. Maybe next time, aim for something a little more realistic." A few kids giggled. One girl repeated it under her breath like it was now the class's private joke. Jalen didn't argue. He didn't speak. His shoulders slumped, his hands curled into small fists, and he stared at the carpet like he wanted to disappear into it. Mr. Denton moved on, oblivious, or uncaring, to what he'd just done. But Mila and Gwen, the girls sitting next to Jalen, noticed. Mila leaned over and whispered, "I believe you." He didn't look up. Just nodded once. The morning went on. Jacob's dad was a firefighter. Chloe's mom owned a bakery. Parents came, smiled, were applauded, and left. But Jalen just sat there, small and quiet. At lunch, he didn't touch his sandwich. Didn't laugh at the boys goofing off by the vending machines. Didn't race for the swings like he usually did. Something inside him had folded up and gone still. Because the worst part wasn't the disbelief. It was how easy it was. How quickly a teacher, an adult meant to nurture curiosity, dismissed a truth just because it didn't fit his assumptions. What Mr. Denton didn't know was this: Jalen hadn't been exaggerating. He wasn't showing off. Every word he said was true. His father, Dr. Kelvin Brooks, was an aerospace engineer. He'd spent the last year working on a Mars communication relay project. He wore a NASA badge every single day. And Jalen? He was proud of that. But in that moment, none of that mattered. Not to the man standing at the front of the room. To him, the idea of a kid like Jalen having a father like that? It just didn't seem possible. But the day wasn't over. And the truth was about to walk through that door, had heard everything. Not the whole day, not the Snickers or the lunchtime silence, but enough. He'd arrived 10 minutes early, just as Mr. Denton was wrapping up a presentation, and instead of waiting in the hallway like the others, a substitute aide invited him to sit in the adjacent resource room. The door was cracked, and voices carried. That's how Kelvin Brooks heard his son's name, and laughter. That's how he heard his profession dismissed like it was a punchline. So when he stepped into that classroom, it wasn't just to give a presentation. It was to reclaim his son's pride. Kelvin walked to the front, slow and deliberate. He didn't scan the faces of the students just yet. He didn't give Mr. Denton the satisfaction of eye contact. Instead, he placed a small flash drive on the teacher's desk. "If it's all right," he said coolly, "I brought a short slideshow." Mr. Denton cleared his throat, stepping aside like a man who'd suddenly remembered he was replaceable. "Of course, Dr. Brooks." Yes. Please. The screen flickered to life. On it, a cartoon rover rolled across a digital Mars landscape. Then came animations showing Earth to Mars communication delays, diagrams of orbital paths, all simple, visual, fun. The kids leaned in immediately. But Jalen didn't look at the screen. He looked at his dad. It wasn't the slides. It wasn't the NASA badge. It was the calm command in his father's voice. The certainty. The stillness in his shoulders. That's what hit hardest. Like a mountain wasn't just something you could climb, it could walk in the door, wearing slacks and a blazer, and call itself your dad. For the past year, Kelvin explained, my team has been working on a relay system to help future missions send clearer, faster messages between Earth and Mars. Imagine sending a text to someone millions of miles away, and hearing back in just minutes. That's the goal. Gasps followed. A few whoas. One kid actually whispered, that's sick. Even Mila looked like she'd forgotten to blink. Kelvin continued, keeping it light, letting science dance. He ended with the final slide, a photo of him and Jalen, side by side in front of a satellite model, both wearing matching visitor tags. His hand was on his son's shoulder. His son was smiling like the universe itself couldn't hold back his pride. There was a pause. Then came the clapping, not polite, not required, but genuine. Even Mr. Denton clapped. But Kelvin wasn't done. He turned to face the room, eyes calm but steady. I know sometimes people don't believe big things about others, he said, voice smooth. Especially when those people look a certain way. Or come from places folks don't expect. But big things come from small beginnings. And kids like Jalen, they grow into scientists, engineers, inventors, if you let them. The room went still. Mr. Denton shifted. Dr. Brooks, thank you. That was exceptional. Kelvin finally looked at him. Not a glare. Not smugness. Just quiet authority. I appreciate that, he said. But next time, when a child tells you something important, believe them. It landed harder than any lecture could have. Mr. Denton gave a slight nod, the kind people give when there's nothing else left to say. Afterward, Jalen didn't run to his dad. He walked. Chest lifted. Eyes clear. He didn't even notice how every kid in the room suddenly looked at him differently, not with confusion, but respect. Kelvin kneeled, straightened his son's collar. You okay? Jalen nodded. They laughed, he said quietly. Kelvin gave a half smile. And now they know. And that was all. On the way out, Mila gave Jalen a high five. Gwen whispered, told you. Mr. Denton. He stayed behind, holding a clipboard he suddenly seemed unsure what to do with. But for Jalen, everything had changed. Because one person's laughter had nearly crushed him, but the truth had walked in wearing a NASA badge, and smiled like gravity didn't apply to dreams. Later that week, the class had to turn in essays about what they wanted to be when they grew up. Most kids scrambled to finish theirs the night before, rushing between soccer practice and video games. But Jalen took his time. He stayed up late, not because he had to, but because for the first time, he wanted to get every word right. He sat at the kitchen table with a warm mug of cocoa and a soft playlist of space-themed movie scores his dad had made him when he was 6. And he wrote like the stars were watching. He didn't just write about being an engineer. He wrote about the sound of rocket fuel igniting. About watching satellites blink through the telescope on cold nights. About how silence in space wasn't empty, it was sacred. And at the end of the essay, he wrote, My name is Jalen Brooks. I'm not lying. I'm just early. When Mr. Denton handed the papers back the next week, his eyes lingered on Jalen's just a little longer. He didn't say much. Just nodded. But sometimes, a nod can carry the weight of an apology. After that day, things were different. The whispers in the hall turned into questions, real questions. Is your dad really working on Mars stuff? Do you think we'll live on other planets one day? What's a black hole really like? Jalan didn't have all the answers. Not yet. But now, people waited to hear what he did know. He started helping other kids with their science projects. Mila asked him to partner up for the solar system diorama. Even Gwen, who used to act like she ruled the classroom, offered him half her gummy bears during lunch and said, "You're not so weird after all." Jalan just grinned. Weird is how planets get discovered. But the real moment came at the school's spring assembly. Every year, the principal picked one student to give a speech about curiosity, leadership, and dreams. It was always a sixth grader. Always someone loud. Someone obvious. But this time, they picked Jalan. And when he stepped on stage in front of the entire school, his tiny frame dwarfed by the mic and the curtain behind him, he didn't shake. He cleared his throat and looked out over the sea of students. "My name is Jalan Brooks. When I said my dad works at NASA, people laughed. And I get it. Because sometimes, when something sounds too big to be true, it's just because you're not thinking big enough." There was a hush. Not boredom. Not noise. Just hush, the kind that leans in. He talked about science. About wonder. About how stars aren't just far away, they're a promise. He talked about the day his dad walked into class and turned laughter into awe. And when he was done, the applause didn't just echo. It erupted. Even the teachers stood. In the back row, Kelvin stood too, hands folded, heart full. He didn't record it on his phone. He didn't need to. He'd built rockets, but this was his legacy. Not the missions. Not the medals. But a boy, standing proud, telling the world, "I'm not lying. I'm just early." And maybe that's the truth for every dreamer. Every kid who gets laughed at. Every child who dares to speak big things in small rooms. They're not wrong. They're not strange. They're just ahead of schedule. As the assembly ended, Jalan stepped down from the stage, and a sea of hands reached out to pat his back or give him high fives. His classmates, those same kids who once rolled their eyes or whispered when he spoke, now looked at him like he was made of stardust. In that moment, Jalan didn't just feel smart. He felt seen. He walked over to Kelvin, who was waiting quietly by the exit doors, a proud smile stretched across his face. Kelvin crouched down so they were eye level. "You crushed it, Commander Brooks," he said, using the nickname they shared whenever they watched rocket launches together. Jalan smirked. "T-0, and I launched." They both laughed. But then Jalan's voice softened. "Thanks for showing up that day, Dad. If you hadn't." Kelvin put a hand on his son's shoulder, gentle but firm. "If I hadn't, you still would have become who you are. I just gave them a peek. You gave them a reason to believe." Jalan didn't respond right away. He looked out across the gymnasium, at the kids still buzzing with excitement, at the principal chatting with a local news reporter who'd shown up, at Mr. Denton, who now looked more like an ally than a skeptic. And then he turned back to Kelvin. "Think they're ready for what's next?" Jalan asked. Kelvin grinned. "The world's never ready for minds like yours. But that's how we make history, right? Not by waiting. But by showing up." The next week, a segment aired on the local evening news. Fifth grader stuns school with speech on dreams, space, and courage. Clips of Jalan's speech went semi-viral on social media. Parents shared it. Teachers passed it around. Even someone at NASA reposted it with the caption, "We're hiring in 10 years, Jalan. Save us a resume." But for Jalan, it wasn't about fame. It wasn't even about being right. It was about being free, free to love what he loved without apology. He joined the school's STEM club, and suddenly, attendance doubled. Not because he was popular, but because kids saw what passion looked like, and wanted some of it for themselves. He even got an email from a girl at another school. People used to laugh when I said I wanted to be a coder. But then I saw your video. Now I don't care if they laugh. I'm still gonna do it. Back at home, Jalan turned the hallway closet into his own mission control, complete with star maps, engine schematics, and handwritten plans for a Mars base made out of recycled shipping containers. And every Friday night, he and Kelvin would sit under the stars in the backyard, sipping cocoa, pointing at constellations, and dreaming even bigger. One night, Jalan asked, "Do you think I'll really get to space?" Kelvin looked up at the sky, wide, black, infinite. Then back at his son. "You're already on your way," he said. "And when you get there, don't just plant a flag. Build a bridge. Make room for more dreamers." Jalan smiled. Because in his heart, he knew, his journey had already launched. Not on a rocket. Not yet. But in words. In courage. In belief. And for every kid who had ever been laughed at for dreaming too big, he'd be the signal in the dark sky reminding them, "You're not crazy. You're just early." 3 months later. It was career day. The gym had once again been transformed, booths lined the walls, professionals in sharp suits and scrubs, firefighters in uniform, small business owners with brochures in hand. But near the back, nestled between a local baker and a retired police officer, was a simple display. A fold-out table. A hand-drawn poster titled, "Mission, Possible, Life as an Aerospace Engineer." And behind it? Jalan Brooks. Wearing a makeshift NASA badge he designed himself, a white dress shirt under a blue windbreaker, and his trademark confidence, not loud or cocky, but magnetic. Calm. Certain. He wasn't pretending anymore. He was presenting. Kids walked up, asked questions. Jalan answered with patience, humor, and diagrams. He let them try on cardboard helmets. Passed around samples of astronaut snacks he'd made at home with freeze-dried fruit and some marketing flair. He talked about thrust, fuel ratios, Mars habitats, and microgravity. And when a first grader tugged his sleeve and whispered, "Do you think I can go to space, too?" Jalan didn't miss a beat. "You already took your first step by asking," he said. Later, Kelvin stood near the back, watching. He overheard two teachers talking near him. "Is that the same Jalan Brooks from last year?" one asked. The other nodded. "Unreal, right? The kid's a one-man space agency." Kelvin smiled but stayed quiet. He wasn't there to gloat. He was just witnessing. Because sometimes, the most powerful thing a parent can do isn't to pave the road for their child, it's to stand back and watch them fly. 1 year later. Jalan stood under a night sky at a summer science camp, surrounded by peers from all over the country. He'd won a scholarship to attend after submitting an essay titled, "Why the Stars Need Our Stories." In it, he'd argued that science and imagination weren't opposites, they were partners. That essay would later be published in a national magazine. But tonight, he wasn't thinking about that. He was standing in a field, telescope aimed at the heavens. A counselor tapped his shoulder. "You up next, Brooks." Jalan nodded and stepped to the portable mic. All around him, campers quieted. "Tonight," he began, "we look at the stars. But not to escape Earth, to understand it. Each of us is a story, and stories are made to rise." A hush. Then a clap. Then more. Because his words didn't just describe space, they created space. Space for wonder. For belief. For kids like him. Epilogue. By the time Jalan graduated high school, He'd already interned at a local aerospace lab, launched a weather balloon with his club, and founded a mentoring program called Launch Pad for younger students who felt like they didn't belong. By college, he was on a fast track to becoming one of the youngest engineering minds in the field. But if you ever asked him what changed everything, he'd smile and say, it wasn't the science fair. Or the viral video. It was the moment someone decided to listen instead of laugh. Because sometimes, a kid's dream doesn't need to be explained or defended. It just needs to be heard. And for every adult who ever questioned why a child dared to dream big, there will always be a Jalen Brooks, standing tall, pointing to the sky, and asking the world to imagine something bigger. Not someday. Now, final scene. A few years later. We see a packed auditorium. Lights dimmed. A large screen behind the stage flashes the title. Youth Innovators in Space Engineering. A spotlight hits the podium. A now 22-year-old Jalen Brooks steps forward, confident, poised. A clean-cut suit, but still that same magnetic presence. The same fire in his eyes. He begins. I was 10 years old the first time I was told to be realistic. I was 11 when I was told I didn't belong. 12 when I was mocked for dreaming of rockets instead of rapping or rebounding. But I'm not here because I convinced them to believe in me. I'm here because I refuse to stop believing in myself. The room goes silent. People lean in. He continues, voice steady. Dreams don't require permission. And brilliance doesn't need validation. All it needs is a launch window. Applause builds. I stand here today as an aerospace engineer, a mentor, and the founder of a company developing educational rocket kits for underserved schools. But more than that, I stand here as proof. Proof that a young black boy with nothing but cardboard, questions, and a constellation in his soul can still reach orbit. Not because he fit in, but because he stood out. The room erupts. People stand. Some cheer. Others wipe tears. Fade to black. Then the words appear on screen, in bold white letters. Dedicated to every kid told they're aiming too high. The stars are closer than they think. Followed by the Thread of Time logo, and a simple line beneath it. Subscribe for more true stories that remind us, history isn't just written. It's launched.